Dr. Gareth Price, thank you very much for talking to us today. So we've decided to interview you as today marks a year since the capital of Afghan in Kabul fell to the Taliban. And we're here to discuss with you today the impact that that has not only now, but also in the future. So the first question I have for you, Mr. Price, is how has Afghanistan changed in the past year since the Taliban took over?
It's gone backwards very quickly. I mean, I suppose the biggest impact has probably been on the economy, much of which was funded by Western donors. That stopped, so civil servants aren't getting paid. Their wages help the rest of the economy. Agriculture, which is a large part of the rest of the economy, is suffering because of a couple of years of drought, not helped by an earthquake a couple of months ago. So you've got a whole host of things. You've got people leaving. According to one survey, 95% of the population are now in poverty. You've got widespread malnutrition. And of course, all of that was exacerbated by Russia invading Ukraine and the cost of fuel and food going up. So it was a bad situation before the Taliban took over. A year on, economically, it's much worse.
So, how do Afghans feel about the Taliban and their presence in Kabul, Mr. Price?
I mean, the positive side, such as it is that there's peace because the Taliban were fighting the government troops and Western soldiers. So there's security, but after the Western withdrawal, certain sort of red lines were set. So one of them was girls being allowed to go to school. Another one was not hosting international terrorists. And the Taliban just seem to have ignored those. So there's a kind of game of brinksmanship with the Afghan population being the kind of casualties of it. I mean, girls are now essentially banned from going to schools in most of the country. And then a week or two back, the leader of Al Qaeda, the kind of biggest international terrorist group, was found living in a house rented out by the family of the interior minister. So they're not playing ball, and it's very difficult. It's not like a kind of marginal red line in the sand, girls' education and hosting international terrorists, and they're sort of brazenly breaking it. And the the victims are the Afghan people who are now, getting a little bit of humanitarian assistance, but certainly much less than they were before.
And well, your answer there has sort of perfectly moved me on to my next question of what is the current situation in Afghanistan for especially women and girls?
So it's increasingly restricted that, there were women working as, news anchors and so forth, and that's stopped. And girls aren't allowed to go to secondary school. One of the fallouts of this is the maternal mortality rate, the number of women dying in labour, which has gone up 4 times from an already pretty high level to a much higher level. And so these restrictions have kind of real impact on people's lives, and women are meant to be chaperoned around, but basically it's very difficult for them to work, to operate, and those restrictions are tightening rather than relaxing.
So, what is the relationship with Afghanistan like with other parts of the world as a result of the Taliban takeover?
I mean, a lot of the neighborhood, I mean, his relationship with the West is sort of a stalemate, whereby the West said we'd like you to do X, Y, and Z, and the Taliban said we're not going to. I mean, other countries in the region are attempting to engage with it, partly for their own kind of stability and such like. They don't want threats emanating out of Afghanistan to affect them, and that's why with sort of countries like China, the Taliban have said, we're not going to host, Islamists that threaten your country. But in terms of, various things have been talked about for many years, like developing mines and so forth. And there was sort of speculation that if the Taliban took over, the Chinese would step in and start developing these mines. That kind of thing hasn't happened. And Pakistan's closest, sorry, the Taliban's closest ally is probably Pakistan, such as it is. But militant groups, there's a Pakistani Taliban group, which has now started operating again. And one of its leaders was found driving around in southern Afghanistan. So there's a lot of concern, I would say, in the region about, the long-term situation in Afghanistan.
And the final question I'll ask you, Dr. Price, is what do you think the next few years hold for Afghanistan?
Well, look, I mean, its history over the last 50 years has been that whoever's in charge in Kabul, there are factions trying to undermine it and overthrow it, generally by force. And you see the kind of embers of that kind of organization coming up from the previous government, from previous Mujahideen groups. I think there was a lot of waiting and seeing going on. But if Afghanistan's history is any sense of the present, then conflict in some form seems likely. And I think it's sort of exacerbated by the fact that there's 95% of the population in poverty, and potential mass malnutrition, if not worse, is going to lead to a stable government. And this is kind of anything but, except that after years, decades of conflict, it does look relatively more secure than it did in the past.
Dr. Gareth Price, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.